I wasn't searching for Tartaria when I stumbled upon the dark day of May 19th, 1780, a date when the sky turned pitch black over New England and parts of eastern Canada. Not just overcast or gloomy, but completely black. Noon became midnight in an instant. Candles were lit in broad daylight. Farm animals headed back to their barns, convinced nightfall had arrived. The blackness was so total, so overwhelming, that Connecticut's legislature had to stop their session because members couldn't even see one another in the same room. The standard explanation goes like this. Forest fires sent smoke from burning woods, carried by strange weather patterns. Clean, simple, case closed. For most folks, that's the end of it. But as I dug deeper into eyewitness accounts from that era, this explanation started falling apart. This phenomenon wasn't limited to New England, because reports of bizarre atmospheric events, blackened skies, blood-red moons, and ash falling from seemingly clear air showed up across several continents during the late 1700s, specifically in 1780, 1783, and 1784. All happening within just a few years, and all strangely lining up with something else. Tartaria vanishing from maps. Let me clarify what the official story tells us. Forest fires, pretty typical in pre-industrial North America, created enough smoke to blacken the sky for hundreds of miles. The smoke hung around most of the day before clearing out. A natural occurrence, maybe uncommon, but explainable. Except the darkness didn't arrive slowly. Eyewitnesses described it coming like someone yanking a curtain closed. Timothy Dwight, who'd later become Yale's president, wrote that the darkness was as strange in how it appeared as in its intensity. This wasn't smoke gradually settling or clouds slowly forming, but a sudden advancing barrier of absolute blackness. And here's the weirdest detail. The darkness had reddish edges. Multiple witnesses described a copper or brass-colored tint where the blackness met what little light remained. When the moon finally rose that evening, it looked blood-red through the haze. Forest fire smoke doesn't act like this. I'm speaking from experience here, having stood beneath wildfire smoke myself. I've watched skies turn orange and brown, seen ash falling like snowflakes. But this account describes something entirely different. The testimonies don't just mention darkness, but a quality of darkness that seems impossible to explain through simple atmospheric conditions. Samuel Williams, a Harvard professor who recorded the event, observed that the darkness spread way beyond any reasonable estimate of where forest fires could have been burning. He figured the affected area covered over 150,000 square miles. That's not just a fire. That's a catastrophe on a regional scale. So why insist on forest fires? Why stick with that specific explanation? And why, when I started following this thread, did I discover that 1780 sits right at the heart of multiple other impossibilities? This is where the pattern becomes visible. In 1776, American independence gets declared, bringing a new nation, fresh narrative, and clean slate. New maps were needed. New history had to be written. Then 1780 arrives with the dark day and the sky goes black. And here's something you won't find in standard history books. 1780 represents a turning point in cartography. The maps shift, but not in the usual way. Maps evolve through gradual corrections, updated land surveys, or refined boundaries. No, something completely different happens. The word Tartari starts disappearing, not rapidly or all at once, but methodically, intentionally, across numerous publishing houses in different countries. The name that had been featured on maps for centuries begins fading away. By 1820, it's almost completely gone. By 1850, it's like it never existed at all. Tartary, or Tartaria depending on your source, had shown up on European maps since medieval times, marking massive territories throughout Central and Northern Asia. The name stuck around through the Age of Exploration, survived the scientific revolution, persisted through the Enlightenment. It appeared on Dutch maps, French maps, British maps, and Russian maps. Then, in the decades after 1776 and 1780, it starts getting erased and replaced with what exactly? With more precise designations, according to official accounts, with proper national and regional names, with Russian Empire territories, the Qing dynasty, various Khanates and tribal regions of Central Asia. The official explanation breaks down here because this isn't how cartographic knowledge functioned in the 18th century. You didn't simply erase a name that had been in use for centuries without documentation, without some transition period, without any explanation whatsoever. Mapmakers were meticulous. They cited their sources, they documented their corrections. But for Tartary, there's nothing. The name just fades into obscurity. If you're watching this, you've probably heard whispers about Tartaria. If this is your first time encountering it, drop a comment telling me what brought you here. This runs deeper than most people realize. What comes after the dark day, what follows Tartary's erasure from maps, is what I call the inheritance period, roughly spanning 1780 to 1850. And this is where things become impossible to dismiss. This is when enormous, technologically advanced buildings start appearing worldwide with suspiciously identical architectural characteristics. Neoclassical revival, they tell us. A return to Greek and Roman principles spreading from Europe to the Americas to Russia to parts of Asia, all within just a few decades. But what if they didn't just appear? What if they weren't actually built? What if they'd always been there? How did San Francisco, still recovering from the gold rush, manage to build world-class Beaux-Arts palaces? How did Melbourne, essentially a colonial outpost, construct exhibition halls rivaling European cathedrals? How did Chicago erect an entire exposition city in 2 years using 19th century technology? The standard answer: progress, industrial revolution, colonial ambition, and human ingenuity. But accepting that answer means ignoring some deeply uncomfortable facts. There aren't adequate records documenting the construction process for most of these buildings. Photographs exist showing completed structures, but almost none exist showing the actual building process. There's no documentation of the massive labor forces that would have been required. No supply chain records for the millions of tons of stone needed. No contemporary accounts questioning how these structures appeared so quickly. What we have instead are dedication plaques, opening ceremonies, and official histories written decades afterward, plus a suspicious uniformity in the storytelling. These buildings represent the triumph of this nation or that empire, built by these or those unnamed worker groups, completed right on schedule despite overwhelming odds. The pattern points toward something else entirely. Not construction, but inheritance. What if these buildings weren't actually built during the 1800s? What if they were already standing there? What if the plaques, the official histories, and the dedication ceremonies were simply reattribution? A new civilization claiming the infrastructure left by an old one. Let me know if you've spotted these patterns in your own city. The evidence is literally everywhere once you start looking. Don't forget to subscribe. This investigation continues. So let me lay out an alternative timeline. Before 1780, a global or nearly global civilization exists. Tartaria, or whatever name they used for themselves, advanced enough to construct the classical architecture we see worldwide, extensive enough to appear on every map, organized enough to maintain infrastructure spanning continents. Between 1780 and 1785, catastrophic collapse occurs, whether from internal war, natural disaster, or something else entirely. Destruction on a scale that darkens skies globally. The population gets killed, displaced, or scattered, but the infrastructure remains standing. From 1785 to 1820, the inheritance period unfolds as surviving or newly arriving populations, through Russian expansion, European colonialism, American westward movement, and Chinese territorial consolidation, claim the empty cities, reattribute the buildings, and create foundation myths. The narrative becomes, "We built this in record time with primitive tools." Between 1820 and 1900, historical revision takes place as encyclopedias get rewritten, maps get redrawn, and academic consensus gets manufactured. Tartaria becomes just a geographic term, not an actual civilization, and the architectural inheritance becomes evidence of rapid industrial progress rather than continuity with a previous culture. From 1900 to the present, the narrative solidifies completely. Anyone questioning it gets marginalized. The coordination problem of how global architecture appeared simultaneously across supposedly unconnected cultures gets ignored. The missing construction documentation never gets investigated, and the abrupt historical transitions never get examined. And the dark day remains just a curious atmospheric phenomenon, forest fires and nothing more. Except it explains too much. The timeline, the architecture, the silence, the coordination. It explains why adequate records don't exist for how these buildings were actually constructed. Because they weren't built, they were discovered. It explains the uniformity of architectural style across supposedly separate cultures because they all inherited from the same source. It explains the rush to attribute, to claim, to establish official narratives. Because empty cities don't belong to anyone specifically, and therefore belong to everyone potentially. And it explains the dark day not as random smoke, but as the final visible evidence of a civilization's last moments, the atmospheric signature left by annihilation. The sky turned black because an entire world was ending, and when the smoke finally cleared, we were told it had always belonged to us. Which brings us back to the dark day itself. May 19th, 1780, when the sky turned black. Not just in New England either, because reports from Europe, Russia, and the Far East describe similar phenomena during the years surrounding this date. 1783 brings the Laki eruption in Iceland, creating what climate scientists call dry fog across Europe. The years 1783 to 1784 bring the Great Frost. 1784 sees widespread crop failures. From 1785 to 1786, strange atmospheric phenomena appear. Blood moons and unseasonable cold. The official explanation fragments into multiple separate natural disasters, forest fires, volcanic eruptions, and unusual weather patterns, all coincidentally clustered within a 5-year window. But what if it was actually one single event? What if the dark day wasn't smoke from forest fires, but atmospheric debris from something far larger? What if the dry fog of 1783 wasn't volcanic ash, but particulate matter from mass destruction? What if the years without summer weren't random climate fluctuations, but the nuclear winter-like aftermath of catastrophe, not from a single eruption or random fires, but from a civilization-ending cataclysm? The kind of event that would explain why Tartaria vanishes from maps after 1780, the kind that would leave behind empty cities waiting for new inhabitants, the kind that would require an entirely new historical narrative to explain the architectural inheritance. Here's the strangest part. If Tartaria was actually a major civilization, if these buildings were constructed by a culture spanning continents, where did everyone go? Not gradually through slow decline and conquest, but abruptly and completely. Maps from 1770 show Tartary clearly. Maps from 1820 show Russia, China, and European colonial possessions instead. The transition happens within a single generation. No major wars documented. No massive migrations recorded. No contemporary accounts of refugees, cultural integration, or conquest and absorption, just complete replacement. And here's what that scenario requires: the total destruction or displacement of a population large enough to build global infrastructure, the erasure of their language, records, and cultural memory, the reattribution of their architecture to new powers, the rewriting of maps, encyclopedias, and histories, plus the coordination of this narrative across competing empires like Russia, Britain, France, America, and China, all somehow agreeing on the identical story that Tartary was never a real civilization. Just a geographic term, nothing worth investigating. The silence is absolutely deafening. No academic investigation into where the people went. No archaeological interest in excavating Tartarian sites. No linguistic analysis of potentially surviving languages. No genetic studies examining population continuity. Instead, there's consensus, immediate and total global consensus, that Tartaria was never important. This raises one simple but critical question. Why? Why would competing empires agree to erase an entire civilization from history? What benefit does this arrangement serve? What are they concealing? Unless the truth is worse than we can imagine. Let's revisit the dark day with fresh perspective. The official explanation about forest fires serves a very specific purpose. It provides a natural, localized, non-threatening answer to an atmospheric phenomenon. It requires no further investigation, implies no larger pattern, and feels comfortable and safe. But the evidence points towards something much larger. Contemporary accounts describe the darkness as unnatural, describe the air as having a peculiar quality, describe sounds like deep rumbling and distant thunder without any storm, describe animal behavior as more than just response to darkness, but response to something fundamentally wrong. What if the dark day wasn't hiding forest fires, but concealing the atmospheric effects of large-scale destruction? Consider what a collapsing civilization would look like from above. Cities burning, infrastructure being demolished, perhaps weaponry we refuse to acknowledge existed. The atmospheric signature would be massive, prolonged, and visible across continents if the civilization was large enough. And what better way to hide that signature than attributing it to natural causes? Fires, volcanoes, weather patterns, all unpredictable, all unremarkable, all requiring no investigation into human causation. The dark day wasn't evidence of Tartaria's existence, it was evidence of Tartaria's annihilation. And the atmospheric explanation, the smoke and fog and natural disasters, wasn't exactly wrong, it was incomplete. A partial truth designed to obscure the complete picture. Yes, there was atmospheric disturbance, but not from random natural causes, from coordinated destruction on a scale we're not supposed to believe was possible in 1780. I can't prove this definitively. The evidence remains circumstantial, fragmented, and suppressed. Official history has answers for everything, even when those answers require believing in impossible coincidences and miraculous construction timelines. But I can ask questions. Why did Tartaria disappear from maps so suddenly? Why isn't there any documented transition period? Where did the entire population go? Why is there zero archaeological interest in answering these questions? Why do buildings from San Francisco to St. Petersburg share identical architectural DNA despite supposedly being built by different cultures with no communication? Why are there so few construction photographs? And why do the ones that exist often contradict the official timeline? Why did atmospheric phenomena cluster so dramatically during the 1780s? Why was the response to the Dark Day, an event that terrified an entire region, so subdued and quickly dismissed? Why does official history insist on natural explanations requiring coincidence after coincidence after coincidence? And why? This is the question haunting me. Why is there such resistance to investigating these questions? Such hostility toward the idea that our official timeline might be incomplete? The deeper I dig, the more the official narrative looks like a construction itself, not exactly a lie, but a careful arrangement of partial truths, a story designed to satisfy without revealing. The Dark Day happened, that's documented. Tartaria appears on maps, then vanishes, that's documented. Global architecture shares impossible uniformity, that's photographed, measured, and standing right in front of us. What isn't documented is the connection, the why and the how. And maybe that's intentional. I started this investigation looking for an explanation of a darkened sky. I found evidence of a dark century, a period when something ended and something else began, when cities changed hands, when history got rewritten, when questions stopped being asked. Was Tartaria a unified empire, a confederation, a technological civilization, or a cultural sphere? I don't know because the evidence has been too thoroughly scrubbed. Did it collapse during the 1780s? Did the Dark Day mark its final hours? Did atmospheric catastrophe erase it while European empires divided the remains? Maybe, because the timeline fits, the silence fits, and the inheritance fits. Or maybe I'm seeing patterns where none actually exist. Maybe forest fires really did darken the sky. Maybe rapid construction really was achievable. Maybe Tartaria really was just a vague geographic term. Maybe. But I can't shake the feeling that we're living in inherited cities, walking through buildings we didn't construct, following maps redrawn to conceal older borders. And I can't stop wondering what knowledge was lost, what technology, what understanding of the world. The architecture remains, though, because stone doesn't lie. Classical facades, impossible domes, global coordination, it's all still standing there, waiting for someone to ask the right questions. The Dark Day was May 19th, 1780. The sky went black, and when it cleared, an entire civilization was gone. If you know what I'm talking about, if you've seen these buildings, noticed these patterns, felt the wrongness in the official timeline, you're not alone. Leave a comment, share your city's anomalies, because this investigation is just beginning. Somewhere in the smoke and silence, there's a truth we weren't supposed to find. And truth doesn't stay buried forever. It just waits for the right questions. What aren't we being told about 1780? What happened to Tartaria? And who benefits from our forgetting? Where are you watching this video from? Write in the comments which city or country you are from. We would love to know who is watching with us. Share your thoughts, observations, or questions. Every comment is important. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss any new videos. Together, we are creating a community of curious explorers.